Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now let me talk about how I got into this predicament. The other day I was moving a few things around and somehow managed to damage one of my DDR5 RAM modules. I've got like this low storage box thing in my office / bedroom, which is what I put stuff on sometimes, and I don't really know why I've got it. I'm always kicking it or accidentally stubbing my toe on it. I probably keep it around because my dog used to chew on it when he was really young, and it's kind of sentimental. Anyway, I've had some RAM sitting on there and I've somehow managed to damage a couple of the gold contacts. I didn't notice until very recently. I put the RAM in my motherboard and I got this scary orange light. One stick still works, but gaming performance is negatively affected and it's no good for benchmarks. I looked into replacing it, but the price of RAM is still really high and I just can't justify what is about 200 quid for a single stick, especially when I have perfectly good DDR4 lying around. Sorry if that seems like a bit of a brag. Having a RAM collection in 2026 is like having a crystal collection. I'm going to put it in a display case in my hallway. Oh, do come through, my friend, this way past the RAM collection. On your left you'll also notice my array of solid state drives. I wish, I'm not made of money, but I'm rambling. I haven't really scripted this video, aside from a few notes, as you can probably tell. Anyway, all this got me thinking about how this channel started. I always wanted to show people that you don't need to spend thousands of pounds, dollars or euros to have fun with PC gaming. That's a little more challenging these days, but far from impossible, especially if you don't care about ray tracing or super high frame rates. Avoiding the latest high-speed memory is of course one advisable way to save money if you are on a tighter budget. DDR4 has also gone up in price, new or used, but here in the UK it's still possible to find 32 gigs of 3200 MHz RAM, for example, for under £100 on eBay or Facebook Marketplace. If you're happy with 16 gigabytes, which is still perfectly adequate for lower cost builds, then great, even cheaper. And I'm sure there are still some decent deals to be found on DDR4 elsewhere in the world too. At the moment, I think a lot of people will be considering a DDR4 based build to try and cut costs, so for me it makes sense to switch back to this older memory type for the purpose of my benchmark videos. I think it'll just be more realistic and more helpful. Most of the time I'm using a 6-core i5-12400F, which supports DDR4 and DDR5. It's very capable at its performance bracket, and because most of the graphics cards we test here are entry level, sometimes lower than entry level, it doesn't hold them back. It's more than capable of getting the most out of sub 200 GPUs. Now I've seen a few DDR4 versus DDR5 videos, usually conducted with higher end processors in pairing with a top tier RTX card, for example. We have done the opposite in the past and tested with a 12th generation i3, but I wanted to see what we can expect from performance with an all-round lower cost system comprising of my i5 and an 8GB Radeon RX 7600. For a little bit of context, this is the closest equivalent to the Steam Machine's graphics card. Now I haven't tested a huge selection of games, mainly because the DDR5 benchmarks were left over from an unused segment in my aforementioned Steam Machine video. Since then, of course, I've accidentally destroyed my DDR5 RAM thanks to my own clumsiness. Now with a system like this, you're going to notice that the GPU is in fact the main limitation, and I think that's one of the reasons why we don't see a huge difference, if any, between DDR4 and DDR5 in most cases. Now I'm using 3200 MHz DDR4 for the on-screen tests. Now in comparison, my DDR5, now deceased, was 6400 MHz. Of course, I'm running the DDR4 in two 16GB sticks, as I was with the DDR5. Now with Cyberpunk 2077, we're getting 85 FPS with a 1% low of 58 and a 0.1% low of 51. A really smooth experience, and as we can see at this preset, the card is the limitation, with the CPU getting up towards 90% utilization in particularly crowded areas. By comparison, And if we look at the DDR5 results on screen too, we're getting 86 FPS on average with a 1% low of 58 and a 0.1% low of 53. So a very small increase across the board and well within what I'd say is margin of error territory. This is not a difference you're going to notice when actually playing with a system configuration like this. In Battlefield 6, with 1080p in the medium preset, which is most advisable for this 8GB GPU, we were getting 116 frames per second with this setup. Very, very respectable indeed. The 1% lows were 82 and 68. When it comes to the older DDR5 results, well, just like Cyberpunk, the average is very slightly improved, up from 116 to 117, and the percentile lows are also slightly increased as well, but again, not a noticeable difference and nothing really worth talking about in depth here. GTA 5 Enhanced with the very high RT preset runs flawlessly almost on the i5 and 7600 rig here. With the DDR4 RAM in the system, we're seeing 81 FPS as an average, a 1% low of 64 and a 0.1% low of 62. These figures tell me that the game was very smooth and consistent, and I'm sure you can tell that from the gameplay shown on screen. Now, DDR5 actually came in with the same average, 81 FPS, although the percentile lows once again were very slightly improved, 66 up from 64 and 63 up from 62, so a tiny difference here, but perhaps still worth mentioning as consistency may be something that you're more likely to see an improvement with DDR5 RAM. Not so much the average, but the smoothness of your games. Though there will be outliers, and we'll get onto this in a little while. Well, Kingdom Come 2 isn't a bad example, to be honest. 83 FPS was the average here with a 1% low of 72 and a 0.1% low of 66. By comparison, my DDR5 pulled noticeably ahead with 88 frames per second, and the percentile lows were also visibly improved. 78 for the 1% low, up from 72, and the 0.1% low was up from 66 to 74. So again, DDR5 will offer a smoother experience even with this sort of lower mid-range or entry-level build, whatever you want to call it. Finally, we come to the outlier of today's video, a game where you're going to notice a massive difference, at least with a system like this, between DDR4 and DDR5, though the gap will close depending on memory speed, of course. For example, if we were using 3600 MHz DDR4 and comparing it to 4800 MHz DDR5, this difference would be smaller, but I was of course just using the RAM that I had to hand today. Now 100 FPS was the average for Forza Horizon 6 with the i5 and 7600, and the percentile lows were 79 and 76. Again, very respectable results, more than playable, pretty smooth overall, but in comparison to DDR5 we are falling significantly short. Now DDR5 managed to pull off 140 FPS on average with much improved percentile lows of 107 and 95 respectively. So although most of the time, and with a system like this, the key differences are going to be with the smoothness of the game, i.e. the percentile lows, there will still be a few titles, even with a more budget focused system, that do pull ahead in terms of the average frame rate. But that's not to say DDR4, even 3200 MHz DDR4, is not still more than capable or ideal for a lower cost system, because it's still a very valid choice, especially now when prices are really high. Now, as annoyed as I was about breaking my DDR5 RAM, I'm pretty glad to see that my good old DDR4 kit performed almost as good as part of this lower cost gaming setup, and in the case of the graphics card being the primary limitation, there will of course be outliers. Forza Horizon 6 showed that, but I wanted to show you that DDR4 is still fine, especially if you're not putting together a super expensive build. I also wanted to share the reasons why I won't be replacing my broken DDR5 just yet, at least while the prices are still so high. For future budget focused content, I'll probably use 16GB of DDR4 as well instead of 32, again as a more realistic setup scenario for cheaper graphics card pairings. It seems odd talking about budget setups and things like that while using DDR5 in my tests. And by using DDR4, I think I'm also giving you more realistic real-world examples as well. But that's all there is to this one. Bit of a personal setup video today. I hope you've enjoyed it nonetheless. Let me know your thoughts down below, of course, as well as if you are still using DDR4, because there are plenty of very capable processors that are still stuck exclusively with this platform. For example, Ryzen on AM4, the 5700X3D, 5800X3D still utilise DDR4, and those are some of the best CPUs for gaming on that respective platform. Thanks as always for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.